Howard Waldrop's presents the entire history of science fiction film up to the present time, which of course was 1981.
Right.
When you came into the room, which was a room about the size of this one, there was a set of 3D glasses on every chair. I don't know where he got all the 3D glasses, the red and blue lens, you know? And at a certain point he said, okay, and then 3D was invented. Everybody put on their 3D glasses, and the whole audience put on our 3D glasses, and then Howard jumped up with wadded up paper from behind the thing and said, meteor storm, meteor storm. And he began to throw meteors at the audience. Well, I won't answer the second half of it, but I will say his paralysis is physical. Unsympathetic to the young writers of the present generation who go to Worldcon and bitch that they're not on any panels, you know. I not only was nominated for a Hugo, but I had won my first Hugo before they put me on a panel. I went to conventions for 5 years. I won my first Hugo in 1985, and I was on my first panel in 1986. So getting on panels wasn't just, ooh, I've sold the story to Clark's World. Put me on 7 panels, please. That did not happen. You really had to pay your dues in those days and sell a whole bunch of stories and actually be someone who, people would conceivably want to hear your opinions on things. And then, as they said, when they did put you on a panel, it was the same panel because there wasn't multi-track programming. There was one track of programming, so they put the new writers on the new writers panel. That was what it was called, the new writers panel. And you had to spend a decade on the new writers panel with more or less the same people every time discussing what it was like.
So he did.
Well, wait, before you get to the raising money here, hey, Harlan made the format of that panel similar to Queen for a Day, the old TV show. He had each of the new writers had to try to top each other by telling how poor they were. And I remember Gardner saying, I'm so poor, I eat my cornflakes with water. And George Leffinger said, you had cornflakes? That was the tenor of the thing.
Then Harlan said, well, I'm going to raise some money for you boys. So he took a dollar bill or something out of his pocket, and he tried to do the sea of green routine, you know. I want to see a sea of green, you know. Bring out your money for these new writers. And there was no movement in the audience. Everyone was sitting on their hands. Nobody was pulling out their money. And so I said, the first person to hit Jack Dan in the nose with a quarter gets a special prize. And the air was thick, and changed. We made about $15, and we ate that
night. They ate very well all weekend. Back when I was writing A Feast for Crows in 2004, 2005, that book got so big and was still far from being complete that I decided to split it into 2 books. I decided to split it geographically. So A Feast for Crows, the 4th book, followed the characters in and around King's Landing primarily, and a few others who were traveling and so forth. But there were some very important characters from the first 3 books who were not in that book, including Tyrion Lannister, the Imp, Jon Snow, and Daenerys Targaryen. These characters and a host of others are the ones I pick up with the new book, A Dance with Dragons. And so essentially you're seeing what happens to them at the same time the stuff from A Feast for Crows is happening to the characters who were featured in that book. It has some new characters in it who I think the fans may like. It has some new viewpoints, characters who have been around for a while, who are known to the readers of the series, but who have never before been viewpoint characters. We've never gone inside their head. So every time we go to a new viewpoint, it gives you a little different angle on what's going on currently, and also on the other characters and some of the things that have gone before. So you'll get that perspective with A Dance with Dragons.
Excellent.
I'm juggling a lot of balls with this one. I have a lot of characters. I have an extremely complex plot, which is sometimes difficult to get rid of. So I'm doing a lot of rewriting and restructuring. I work on something and it's like all done, and then I get a better idea and I change it. which is one reason why it's taken so long. But it is the way I work, and I'm not going to change it. It's been successful for me so far. It's produced the books that a great many people seem to like, and that I'm proud to have written. So, I'll continue that.
Actually, has my wife left?
I don't see her.
I don't see her either, yes. What?
2 minutes ago she left.
Uh-huh. Yeah, Paris and I actually were naked when we met. It was at...
Manatees?
1970, similar though, 1975 KublaiKhan in Nashville, Tennessee. A convention where, not only did we have a skinny dipping party, but the hotel had a sauna, a men's and women's sauna. And it being the 70s, which was part of the 60s, and us being free, liberated, hippie-type people, we decided that this sexual discrimination had to go, and we would break down the gender barriers and liberate the sauna. So women were going into the men's sauna, and men were going into the women's sauna. And I was sitting with a bunch of other people in the women's sauna when Paris entered. And Joe Haldeman introduced us, because he and Paris were friends already. The thing about being naked, us guys, when we meet an attractive young women, like to be cool and and sophisticated and not show too much interest because you don't want to seem too interested. You want to seem very kind of sophisticated and man of the world and things like that. But under certain circumstances, if you're naked, your interest becomes immediately apparent. And that indeed was what happened here. But, it kind of worked out, so. It did years later when we were...
Nowadays you would tweet to each other. Not as much fun.
When we were moved to Santa Fe in the early 80s, and we were living in Santa Fe, we met this couple who were in Santa Fe who were always throwing parties. And they threw great parties. They had a big house in a good neighborhood of Santa Fe, and they threw, like Halloween parties and Christmas parties. And their parties would always have a theme. It would be like, oh, this is a Roman party, come with a toga or something, or this is a monster party, come as your favorite monster. They would always do this sort of thing. So they called us up one day and invited Paris to meet to their latest party, and we said, yeah, we'd love to come. And what's the theme? And they said, come dressed as you were when you first met. We skipped that party.
No, I don't think there are any characters in there who are wholly good or wholly evil. Just as I don't think there are any people in the world who are wholly good or wholly evil. It's often said Hitler loved dogs, and was very kind to animals. Human beings are complex people. I've read a lot of history, and it's amazing the things that you find out about people. I mean, people who we think of as heroes who did terrible things in their life, people who we think of as villains who had moments of compassion or kindness, or who had people who loved them. I think all of us have it in us to be angels, and all of us have it in us to be monsters. The question is the decisions we make at crucial periods and times of our life. William Faulkner famously said in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech that the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. And I take that from my mantra and try to reflect that anytime I create a character.
I had written in the early 80s, I wrote and published a novel called The Armageddon Rag, which was my rock and roll fantasy novel. Thank you. Where the fuck were you people in 1984?
George, they weren't born yet.
That was my rock and roll novel. I made a big mistake in that. I quoted at the end of every chapter, at the beginning of every chapter in the Armageddon Rag, there's a 2-line quote from a rock song. And then there are other quotes from rock songs embedded in a text, and these are kind of necessary to the novel. It was only when it was done, I assumed in my naivete that all this was fair use, and then it was done, my publisher and my lawyers informed me that no, it wasn't, and I would have to get permission for every quotation from a rock song and track it down and paid for it. So it cost me half a year just to do all the correspondence. Some permissions I never did get. I had to rip the songs out, and it cost me like $5,000-$6,000 by the time I was done.
So at that point, I started thinking, well, how could my story be done in a visual medium? And of course, I'd worked in television for 10 years. So it seemed to me that television was the only answer. You do it as a television season, you can do the same book. You can have 10 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours, and a series of books. You can do each separate book as an entire season. So it seemed to me that was the way to do it, to adapt it for television, not for film, and to do each book as a season by itself.
Now, Gardner, I met in 1971, right here in, Washington,
Not in this room,
Washington,
really.
D.C., but it was not actually, it was actually in Washington, D.C., not, what is this, Gaithersburg, Maryland? Yes, it wasn't in Gaithersburg, it was in Washington, D.C., at my very first science fiction convention at the Shoreham Hotel in Washington. It was a disclave, and I attended. By that time, I was a filthy pro. I had sold 2 stories, and one of which had appeared in print, and I walked in, and Gardner was working the registration desk. So I gave him my $3 or whatever the thing was, and when I told him my name, he said, "I bought your story."
Yes, I did, because I was a slush reader for Galaxy magazine, and I had pulled your story out of the slush pile and tried to convince Jake Jacobson, who didn't really pay that much attention. He said, "Oh, all right."
Yeah.
So he bought it.
That was the hero.
I was the very first person George ever met in science fiction fandom. And he actually came back to another convention. Think about that for a while. A lack of discernment on your part.
That's true. And I might not have, but the second person I met at that science fiction convention was Jay Holdeman's current wife, who was wandering around the registration area in a bikini, encouraging all the attendees to sign her body. And I thought, hey, this is a place for me. Howard, I met the next year when I went down, going to this disclave convention convinced me that I like these science fiction conventions. And Howard and I had never met, but he was still living in Texas. I was living in Chicago by 1972, working in Vista. Didn't have much money. I was doing my conscientious objector alternative service. But there was a convention in Kansas City. So Howard said, well, why don't you come down? You can come down. I'll come up from Texas. We'll meet halfway in between. Kansas City is between Chicago and Texas. So I said, well, I could probably scrape up the money to come down on the train. But I don't have the money for a hotel room or anything. No problem. I'm driving up with my friend Buddy, and Buddy has a room, and you can stay in our room. So I said, oh, great, that's good. So I came down on the train from Chicago, got off, had no fucking money. I mean, I would, money was worth more in those days, but still, I had like 75 cents or something like that. So I'm getting out of Kansas City's Union Station with my suitcases. This was before suitcases had wheels. So you actually had to carry them around. And I got my suitcase, and I'm looking around for where I'm supposed to go. The Continental Hotel, I think it was. And I realized I didn't know, never been in Kansas City before, had no idea what this hotel was, but I knew I didn't have the money for a cab. So I just looked around and I saw some tall buildings and I walked toward them. And fortunately I was right. That was downtown Kansas City. And I found a hotel, but I didn't find Howard. It was like late. I'd had to work till 5 o'clock and it was a late train, so it was like 10, 11 o'clock when I got there. So I'm looking for Howard, and there's no sign of this funny-looking Texan. I've seen pictures of him, but I haven't met him here. And I'm wandering around. I said, well, he's staying with Buddy Saunders. I'll go to Buddy Saunders' room. And I knocked on the door of Buddy Saunders' room, and some stranger answers the door and says, yeah, you know. I said, I'm George. Yeah. Is Buddy here? He's asleep. Is Howard here? No. I'm supposed to be staying in this room. I don't know anything about that. Door slams in my face here. I did finally find Howard. He was out partying. He was a wild, crazy guy at that time. So he took me down, and I did have a place to stay in Buddy's room. He had spoken to Buddy about me staying in his room. See, what I had imagined, though, was that, you know, Howard and Buddy would have a room, and I would be the third person in that room. And, you know, probably there'd be like twin beds, and Buddy, being the guy who was paying for the room, Buddy was a huckster, so he had money. Buddy would have a bed, and Howard, being a gentlemanly sort, would probably give me the second bed and sleep on the floor or something like that. Well, no such fucking luck here. Buddy was asleep in a bed. There was some other guy, actually 3 other guys asleep in the second bed here. Howard was like on the floor between the beds, and there was another guy in the bathtub and another guy in the closet. And there were Texans all over the floor. Everywhere I went, I stepped on a fucking Texan here. I finally found a little place in the corner if I sort of got under the desk and used my boots as a pillow there. So that was my acquaintance with Howard. Come down and stay in Buddy's room. Okay, well, I told the story of the first convention, and I met Gardner behind the desk taking registration at Disclave 1971. What I did not tell was what I was wearing at the time. It was 1971. I had never been to a science fiction convention, but it sounded, I don't know, I thought I should dress up for it. I didn't know, you know, you wore T-shirts and jeans to certain things, but this was a professional convention with professional writers and editors and stuff were going to be there. So I put on, you know, my best outfit. I had my burgundy bell bottoms, my wide, sharp-colored, you know, tan shirt with, I didn't go for those bogus ties, so I had a lime green Apache scarf. And over that, I wore my famous double-breasted pinstripe mustard yellow sports jacket. Well, you know, writers have written for far longer than even than Vance. I mean, Nigel Tranter, the great Scottish historical novelist, I think was still producing new works right up until his mid or late 90s. Jack Williamson, my own dear friend and colleague from New Mexico, was in his late 90s and still writing right up to the time of his death. So, you know, I hope to finish the Ice and Fire series much sooner than that, but then to go on to write many more books. Some set in Westeros and some set in the Wildcard universe, or a sequel to Fever Dream, which I've always thought of doing. Some ideas, my famous unfinished novel, Black and White and Red All Over, I'd like to get back to at some point. I have an idea that I've been wanting to write for years about a haunted movie palace called Now Showing at the Castle. You know, I have tons of things I'd like to do, and life is short, unfortunately, but I hope it will be long enough for me to do some of these. I have known a few writers who have retired. I cannot imagine ever retiring. Writing and being a writer is too much part of my identity and too much part of what I am. I don't know what I would do with all that time if I did stop writing, you know, play video games or something like that, watch a lot more television. It seems unlikely to me. I've always told stories, whether I could make my living from it or even when I was a little kid, just making up stories for the other kids in the neighborhood. And I think I'm going to continue to do that until the end. You're telling it wrong.
Oh, no. Does this involve you having your fly open?
No. No, the basic parameters are right. The first Yugo Losers Party was 1976 in my room at Big Mac. It was on a Monday night. Mostly the Yugo Losers Party these days are on the night of the Yugos, which is Sunday night. But in that case, I'd lost two the night before. I'd lost two Yugos. And it took me to the next day to think, well, losers should have a party too. The fucking winners were all out celebrating winning, and we'd lost. And it was Monday night. It was Dead Dog Party, so we were able to, go around to all the bid parties and other things and scrounge all their leftover booze. So we had all the leftover booze, and my room was right next to the pool, so it was easy to do. And just as Gardner said, he sat at the door, and the room was absolutely packed with people, and it was one of these rare parties. You know how you get a party sometimes, and there are like 20 people in the room, but there are like 10 different parties because people are talking to each other in the corners and all that. But every once in a while you get a rare thing where it's like all 20 people are focused on one kind of thing, and we were all kind of focused on Gardner and who would appear. And whenever a winner appeared at the door, we would boo him and throw peanuts at him or something like that and say he couldn't come in because he couldn't win. And they would have to tell stories, like Alfie Bester appeared, and everybody booed him and threw peanuts. Alfie, you can't come in. You're a fucking winner. You won the first Yugo. And Alfie said, yes, but it's a Oldsmobile hood ornament that is all rusted and corroded now. Oh, okay, come on in. So everybody was like that. Jerry Pornell, who had also lost two Yugos like me the night before, appeared, and everybody said, Jerry, you're a big loser. Come on in, Jerry. You're welcome here. This is your place. And he said, I won the Campbell Award, and walked away. Larry Niven had indeed won the Yugo. He was one of the ones that defeated me the night before. He had won the Yugo, which one of the things that Ken Keller and Big Mac were responsible for is the Yugo bases. Up to then, the Yugo bases had been pretty simple blocks of wood with a plaque on them and a rocket on top. Ken Keller had Tim Kirk design a really nice ceramic dragon base on a round thing, and that set off this progressive thing where every year the Yugo base gets more and more elaborate and stranger and all that. But it was a ceramic base, and Larry Niven had received his, and while leaving the stage, had dropped it and shattered the ceramic dragon. So, and he blamed Ken Keller and the committee for it because he said the steps were not adequately lighted, instead of just saying, oh, I did that. So the committee was a little annoyed with Ken, and they said, well, we do have an extra base, Larry, but to get it, you'll have to come to the Yugo Losers Party. So Larry wasn't any more pleased to be at the Yugo Losers Party than Jerry had been, but he had to come in, and we all cheered him as a big loser and all that. Sadly, today the Yugo Losers Party has lost all sense of irony. It's like like now you have to say, and the Oscar goes to, because if you say, and the winner is, the other people feel like losers and their little feelings are hurt, So now they call, the Yugo Losers Party has become an official part of the convention, and they call it the Yugo Nominees Reception, because some little tender feelings were hurt by people being called the loser. But we up here are proud losers.
That's right.
We've lost many Yugos.
It can't be done for film, much as I would have liked to have seen it done and to have that $200 million budget or something that a big feature film can get. The story might have been a good story, but it would not have been my story.
I won one of the first World Horror Awards that was given. Now, the World Horror Award is a very handsome little trophy. It's designed by Gay and Wilson, I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
It's a little haunted house, like an Addams Family kind of house with, some of the upper windows have like tentacles coming out, and the chimneys are all crooked and things like that. And it's all cast in a cold stone ceramic. But there's no obvious plaque or base on it, but it has a little bronze door. And when you open the little bronze door, inside it has, World Horror Writers of America, and then your name and the title of the story that you won for. And I won the very first year it was given. I won Best Short Story for my short story, The Pear-Shaped Man. So it was given in New York City, that first banquet, and I was there to accept it. And, I'm from Bayonne, New Jersey. So I was staying with my family in Bayonne, which is right outside New York City, just a 45-minute cab or bus ride away. So I was commuting. I wasn't getting a room at the hotel. So I won my award and I partied, and I took the bus home, and I was staying with my mother, and she looked at the award, and then she opened it up and opened up the little brass door. I said, "Oh, that's very nice. I'm very glad you won the award, And she read, "George R. Martin, the pear-shaped man." "That's not a very nice thing to call you on your award." Yes, I had a little more about those. Tyrion is known in the books as a voracious reader. So in one of his chapters in an early draft, I had him remembering as he was on this continent, Essos, for the first time. He's never left Westeros before, reflecting on these books that had written centuries before by a traveler from Westeros who had written Wonders and Wonders Made of Man, and there was some paragraphs about what they were. And it was an interesting background story, but it kind of slowed the story. So I kept in just the oblique reference, but took out the more detailed explanation of it. Actually, having to say a very inebriated R.A. Lafferty is somewhat of unnecessary. R.A. Lafferty was a brilliant writer, but I don't think I ever encountered him when he wasn't very inebriated.
No. In fact, it was one of the great disappointments of my Spanish career that I never got a coherent word. And he was always very cheerful. You'd say, "Hey, hi, Mr. Lafferty," and he'd go, "Grush, black." You say, "Oh, that's very interesting, Mr. Lafferty."
He was an inoffensive drunk. He would just sit
cheerful.
in easy chairs, smiling, sometimes sleeping, and waking up and smiling again. And, on occasion, some fans who were concerned about him when it was like 3 a.m. would help him out of the easy chair and escort him back to his room and, put him there, and then they would return to the party and find him mysteriously back in the easy chair. Wildlings are humans.
Yeah.
They're just humans who happen to live beyond the wall, and their culture has evolved differently because they're not subject to kings or laws or lords, and they're more of a tribal society, village society, living in very harsh conditions. The worst con experience ever.
Oh, God, I have a couple of...
Well, you could talk about what was the worst convention, but I've had a great time at some very bad conventions. Right. And I've had a bad time at some very good conventions because there's always the personal thing going on. Early in my career, it's always a big deal when a writer is first asked to be guest of honor. That occurred for me for the first time in 1976, and then again in 1977. And both of those were kind of checkered experiences. In 1976, I was invited to be guest of honor for the first time ever at a convention in El Paso, Texas, put on by the Texas fan Willie Cyrus. Willie is a nice guy, and he was the fan guest of honor at this last WorldCon. And Willie ran conventions for many years, and he always meant well. But the Texas fans developed his name into an adjective and said, "You'd been willied." I was one of the first persons to be willied because I got down there and discovered that they didn't actually have enough money to reimburse me for like my airplane tickets and things like that. So, my airplane tickets had cost like $300 and they had like $100, and Willie said, "Oh, no problem. We can get the rest of the money, but you just have to talk. We got some money from the English department and we got some money from the student government." So I'm running around for like a week talking to all these different El Paso University things. I'm talking, giving a speech here and giving a little talk there. And one day I'm in the car, and he said, "Well, I'm taking you another class here. We're getting $50 from the English department." And no, from the German department, I think. What? I don't speak German. It's not in German. This is a class about Thomas Mann. All you have to do is talk about Thomas. I've never read Thomas Mann. What the fuck am I going to say about Thomas Mann? Well, we're getting $50 from the from the German department from their speakers fund. So I got willied pretty good on that one. And then the following year, 1977, my second guest of honorship, Biloxi, Mississippi, CoastCon. They invite me to be guest of honor. This guy named Mike, I think it was, calls me up and says, "Oh, I love your short stories. I've read this, I've read that. It's great. Would you be our guest of honor?" And I said, "Well, yes, but you have to pay my tickets. I don't know anything about Thomas Mann. You got to know that right away." And he said, "Oh, okay, no problem. We got you." So I commit to going to Biloxi, and like months pass because they arrange these things well in advance. And then I don't hear from them. But then, like a month before the convention, the phone rings and it said, "Well, hi, this is Fred, and I'm the chairman of CoastCon, and you're a guest of honor." I said, "Yeah, I'm your guest of honor. I'm coming down there next month. But what happened to Mike, the guy here?" "Oh, Mike, he was in the Air Force, and they transferred him to Colorado, so he's not with us anymore. So I was the vice chairman. I'm the new chairman of the convention." "Oh, great." And he said, "Well, you're a guest of honor." And I said, Yeah, I am." And he said, "Well, the thing is, nobody else on the committee has ever heard of you. Can you tell us some things that you've done so we know something to put in the program book?" So that was sort of humbling. And I went down there. I did tell them some things. They were actually very nice to me, but the convention had not a single book on sale anywhere. So I went down there, and they were nice to me, but there were no copies of my books on sale. And then, as guest of honor, you had to give a guest of honor speech. And it's usually frequently at a banquet. So we go to the banquet, and I'm the professional guest of honor, right? So the Toastmaster makes a few jokes, and then they bring up the fan guest of honor, and the fan guest of honor gives a speech. And then they bring up the artist guest of honor, who the artist guest of honor says, my speech is in the art show, which is what the fuckers always say. They don't have to give a speech. And then they bring me up, and I give this long speech that I've worked on for some time. And, it goes over pretty well, and everybody's clapping. And that's usually it. We've eaten the banquet, we've had the things. I'm the professional guest of honor. I'm last on the program, usually. But then I sit down after my speech, and the chairman gets up and says, "And now for the real highlight of the evening, we have this guy to play the musical Saw." And a guy gets up and he plays the musical Saw for 45 minutes. And I'm at the head table. I have to sit there, really enjoy.
You said, "Shit, I'm trapped in a Howard Waldrop story."
The great thing about reading, for me, is that it broadens your life. We all live our lives, but I think a reader lives 100 other lives. You look back on books that you read 10 years ago, 20 years ago. In some cases, you can remember the events in the book better than you can remember what you were actually doing 20 years ago. But you read Lord of the Rings, and you remember what Frodo and Sam were doing, perhaps, or you read Fitzgerald, and you remember what Gatsby and Daisy were doing, but you don't remember what you were doing at the time you did it. And that's a sign of how much the book has entered our lives. We lived those books, in a sense. Those experiences, imaginative though they be, become our experiences. And that's what I hope my readers take away from it, from another life, another set of experiences, another set of highs and lows and triumphs and tragedies and emotions. Faulkner, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, said the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself, and I've always taken that as my credo. I think that is true, and it's true of all fiction writing, not just literary fiction, but also science fiction, fantasy, mystery fiction, romance, what have you. If the human heart in conflict with itself is at the heart of all great fiction. Well, I have a very big story to tell, It's an epic story. It takes place over several continents in a relatively long period of time, and it involves complex politics and war and other things like that. So there's no one possible single character that could possibly tell the entire story. He'd be experiencing part of it, but the rest of it would be occurring on a different continent or on a different half of Westeros. He'd be just hearing about it in a letter or a report. So obviously you need more than a single viewpoint character. Now the other way to go would be omniscient viewpoint, where I'm just God and I'm looking down at the players. But omniscient viewpoint, I've never liked that as a reader. We don't experience, none of us are God. When we experience life, we see it through a particular viewpoint. You know, I'm looking at you, you're looking at me. We're not above looking down on the two of us here. You know, you don't see, if someone was sneaking up behind you with a knife, you wouldn't necessarily see that person, but I might. So it makes a huge difference in whose viewpoint we tell that particular incident from. That's the way we experience life. That's the way we should experience fiction, I believe. So therefore, given the size of the story and my belief about third-person viewpoint being the way to do it, a series of third-person viewpoints so you can present all sides of a large canvas was the logical way to go.
I remember that Lunacon very well, because that was the first convention where I met Harlan Ellison. And I came up to him, and being a hot new writer, of course, I wanted to be in his anthology. So I said, I'd really like to submit you a story for The Last Dangerous Visions. And he said, no, it's closed, coming out of Christmas.
And in some alternate world, it did.
Now, Howard, when we first met at that convention in '72 in Kansas City, there was a Playboy Club on top of that building where the hotel was. In those days, there was still Playboy clubs. So we went up there with Buddy. Now, Buddy Saunders, one of the Texas Trio, Howard's friend, sometimes Howard's landlord. He had a lot of bucks in those days because he was a huckster. He had a chain of comic book stores and stuff like that. So he bought, like everybody around, the beers, and we're nursing our beer. Howard and I are nursing our beers because we can't afford no second beer. And, you know, the bunnies are coming around. Not the bunny. Yeah, bunnies. Bunnies at a Playboy Club, yeah. Playmates are in the magazine. Okay, bunnies were coming around. And we actually left to work on a story together. We went down to Buddy's room when everybody else was up with the Playboy bunnies and the beer to work on Men of Greywater Station. And if you've read that story, we should have stayed with the bunnies.
But Bayonne is a peninsula, and we have New York Bay on one side, Newark Bay on the other side, and the two bodies of water connected by a deep water channel called the Kilvan Cull. And the projects that I lived in happened to be right on First Street, so directly across from us was the Kilvan Cull, and beyond that, Staten Island. And it's a deep water channel where many ships bound for Port Newark come and go. So I was a kid who never went anywhere, not even like to the lake or to New York City, which was not too far away. And yet I would watch these big ships pass every day and all through the night with flags from all around the world, from China and Liberia and South America. And I'd start to imagine all these places, and I think it woke a hunger in me for seeing distant wonders and then creating distant wonders, making up stories about the places I would go, the things I would see, or, you know, transposed to my characters. So I took the travels in my imagination that I was not able to take in my actual life, and have continued to do so.
I had experience as Toastmaster. Back in the late '70s, early '80s, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. I was the Toastmaster at a small convention at which Mike Glickson was the fan guest of honor, and Jim Odbert was the artist guest of honor, and A.E. Van Vogt was the professional guest of honor. So we had a banquet, and then as Toastmaster, it's my job to be funny and to introduce these guests. And, you know, I knew Jim Odbert and Mike Glickson pretty well, so I was pretty scathing and funny about them. And I didn't know Van Vogt, one of the great figures of the field, a giant of the golden age. And I wasn't quite comfortable. How much fun can I make of him as a Toastmaster can? But I came up with some stuff that was just, totally bogus. And got a few laughs, and it was good, So I thought I did a good job as Toastmaster, where I introduced Glickson, I got great laughs. I introduced Odbert, I got great laughs. And then I brought up Van Vogt for a speech, and I got some pretty good laughs. And then Van Vogt starts speaking, and he was delivering one of these 3-hour speeches here, and people are sitting there, and he's delivering this deadly serious speech. He's got a stack of index cards that I'm sitting next to him, like I'm sitting next to Howard here, and I can see how thick this stack of index cards is. And he's just droning on, and the audience is getting very restive, and it's a small room. People don't want to be, and we're trapped on the head table. And, it goes on like 15, 20 minutes, half hour into the speech. He's like moved through like 4 index cards and has like 40 to go here. And Mike Glickson from the end of the table, like Harlan, starts sending me notes and saying, George, you have to do something. George, you have to put an end to this. Can't interrupt this is A. Van Vogt who's speaking, man. He was a giant of science fiction before I was born, man. This is the guy who wrote Null and the Weapon Shops of Isher and all of these things. I can't just say, shut up, A. Van Vogt. And Mike is sending me these notes saying, you're the Toastmaster. This is your responsibility. You have to keep this thing moving. So I think about this, and I come up with a great idea here. So I'm writing notes, and I'm sending them back the other way, sending them down the table to Mike, and then Mike is passing them out to people in the audience, and we're circulating through. And the plan that I came up with, I said, well, occasionally he's pausing to shuffle his index cards and move on to the next one. I said, the next time he even takes a break or pauses at what seems the end of the sentence, I want the entire audience to leap to his feet and give him a standing ovation. And maybe he will take the hint and conclude it at that point. And notes are passing all the way through the audience, and Van Vogt's completely oblivious to it, and he's just going on and on and on. But my plan bears fruit, and he finally pauses for a breath, and up goes the audience, and thunderous applause. Yeah, it goes on and on for what seems a long time. And I say, oh, he's got it. And he's smiling, and he's beaming, and he's going like this. And then finally, the applause stops, and he goes on. So at that point, I knew I was doomed. One of the things that drove me crazy in Hollywood was the attempts in the film and television industry to test everything. You do a pilot, and they screen it for a focus group, and question them and make them fill out questionnaires. Did you like the hero? Did you like him doing this? And then you get back reports. Oh, the focus group didn't like the hero. Can you make him more likable? And I don't. That's commerce. They're trying to produce the most popular product, one that will make money for the corporation. I understand that, but it's not art. And what I'm about is art. Art. You don't get to vote on art. You don't get to say, this Captain Ahab, he's very unlikable. Can't we make him more like the captain in the Love Boat? Then people would like him better,
Give him another leg.
Yeah. Who wants to see this one-legged guy? He's very grouchy. No, I'm not interested in that. I want to tell my stories, and put them out there, and some people are going to like them, some people aren't going to like them. Fortunately, I found a lot of people who like them enough for me to make a living at, and that's fine. But it's great when the fans come up to me and say, I love your books, they've made a difference in my life. That pleases me no end. And some of them say, I don't like your books, there was too much sex for me, they were too violent for me, or alternatively, they were too slow for me, or well, that's fine. They're entitled to their opinion. There are a lot of other books out there that they can buy, that they might like better, but
I wouldn't like and my readers wouldn't like. I mean, that's you pay your money and you take your choice, and the world is full of choices. We see many of them here behind us, and that's fine. But I don't want to be influenced in the act of creation, whether it's by a network executive or by my fans.
I'm going to tell some stories here, which may lead to these guys telling stories. So, if any of you are of tender sensibilities or hate to hear about things like breasts or nakedness or carryings on, you should probably leave now because I wouldn't want to offend anybody. But fandom was a little wilder and more fun in those days. At that same 1979 convention. That we were talking about earlier, where the cheese doodles and the pretzels fought. That was at the Galt House in Louisville. That was the North American, the NASFIC, because the Worldcon was overseas that year. And the Galt House is a grand old hotel on the banks of the Ohio River in Louisville, Kentucky. And it's been rebuilt several times over the years. It actually goes back to the mid-19th century. But the Galt House in 1979 had many features, one of which was a large heated swimming pool. And in those days, a frequent happening at many science fiction conventions was skinny dipping parties at night, where the fans would throw off their clothes, and the suits who need suits, and they would leap in and swim about. And it was the 70s, and people were not quite so uptight as they are, and that was fine. And they would usually do this after the pool was closed, when lifeguards were off duty, sometimes late at night, like midnight, but sometimes in the early evening. In the case of the Galt House, the number of fans decided that they would have their skinny dipping party at the hall in the early-ish evening or so, 8 or so. It was dark, the pool was closed. What they didn't know was that the pool had glass sides that opened on the hotel restaurant and bar. So all of the people who were having their meals and drinks at the bar or enjoying a late supper suddenly looked up behind the bar and the large glass windows, and there were these giant white shapes of somewhat pale and frequently not in the best of shape, overweight fans flashing by. And Gardner, who was one of the people in the bar at that time, called out in his famous high, reedy voice, "Look, manatees!"